All right. In our workshop today, we're going to be using Google Data Studio. So in order to reap the benefits of our session, please sign into your Google account, download the dataset provided, and get ready to follow along. We also put the data link in the chat box, so feel free to scroll up to the top and find that. One quick disclaimer is that the dataset contains fictional data and is not affiliated with our organizations. Also in our session today, like I said before, feel free to utilize the chat box within the Whova app if you have any questions. It'll be easiest if you join the session on your desktop, both to access the chat and to follow along. We will leave some time at the end to answer your questions from the chat. So let's start from the basics. What is Google Data Studio? Data Studio is a data visualization tool created by Google, not shockingly, sharing similar features with Power BI and Tableau. It is a relatively new data viz tool and continues to get updated with new features. The dashboards on the screen here are just a few examples of what you can do in Google Data Studio. And as you can see, the possibilities are really endless. Today, we're just going to scratch the surface of what you can do in this platform. I know everyone always asks, well, why use this? There's all these other programs. For one, we found 3 reasons. 1, it's free. This is especially critical if school budgets are tight. 2, it's part of the G Suite. So because of this, dashboards sync seamlessly with both Google Sheets, Google Forms, and everything else. A dashboard could automatically update as you get survey responses too, which is pretty cool. 3rd, it's interactive. This means that charts will automatically adjust based on user inputs. And these 3 things are why Google Data Studio is worth your consideration. So we have a lot to cover today, so buckle up and get ready. Take a quick scan of this list to see what we're going to learn about today. This workshop is being recorded, so if you miss anything or get behind, no worries. You can always go back and rewatch the recording. So this is the beautiful dashboard that we're going to create today together. So without further ado, I'm going to transition to Kendra here so she can guide you through the dashboard creation process.
All right, thanks, Andy. So we're gonna get started here. The first thing we need to do is get our data. So in the participant materials, also in the link in the chat box, you can find our data. And so our data looks a little something like this. We have 2 tabs here. One tab has roster data for our students. So we have student ID, grade level, gender, race, ethnicity, and we also have a 0-1 variable for SPED status. So if you have a special education student, that is going to be a 1 for that student. If the student is a general education student, it's going to be a 0. We also have assessments. So if we have student IDs that match with our roster. We have the assessment score, we have the date that the assessment was taken, and we also have the subject. It's math, and if you keep on scrolling down, we also have reading as a subject as well. So these 2 data sets are the data sets that we are going to use today. So let's go to our Data Studio webpage. So if you open a new window, you can go to datastudio.google.com. And you'll want to make sure you're logged into the same account that you made a copy of your data. If you haven't done so already, it might be helpful to make a copy of this data. So go to File, Make a Copy, and then you can edit the data and you should be good to go. Within Google Data Studio, this is kind of the home page, and we are just going to start by creating a blank report. Once we add our blank report, we automatically get prompted to add some data. So since our data is in Google Sheets, we are going to sync our dashboard to Google Sheets. So we're going to find Google Sheets here, select it. We're going to find the data. So wherever you saved it, here's where I saved it. And there's going to be 2 worksheets, and these are our 2 tabs. So we're happy adding our roster data, and we can add this data to the report. Give it a second, add it to the report. And aha, we have data. Now we are going to want to also add our other data set. So you can either click this Add Data button, or you can go to Resource, Manage Added Data Sources, and you can actually add a data source. And we're going to go through the same process. So go to Google Sheets, find wherever you stored your data. I saved mine to my drive, and we're going to click Assessments this time. If you click this little icon with the arrow, that's actually going to open the data set. So if you want to, check that you're in the right data set, you can do that. And we're going to add it to the report. So again, we are in manage added data sources, I believe. We'll double check. If you go to resource, manage added data sources, we see both of our data, and this is blue, so we can edit these. If you didn't save a copy of it, it might not show the edit field, so you might want to make sure you have edit access to whatever data you're working in. But we're going to actually look at the data. So if we click edit here, we are going to see here are our different data sources, and these, for the most part, except for record count, which is automatically added in, we should see the same headings for our roster data as we see here, although it might be in a slightly different order because I think it alphabetizes it. This is what we can do to we check our variables, it's good. We can go back. Whoops, don't do that. Cancel that. We want to keep our data here. We can close out of this part, and so we have our data here. Now, rule of thumb, it's typically good to add a title to your report so you don't have a million untitled reports. I'm going to just title this Sample Dashboard. A couple things as well that you'll notice if you just click on the canvas, you have this theme and you have layout. Here is where you kind of can edit some, document specific design elements. So we can choose different themes and color schemes, and you can even customize it as well. For the sake, I am completely content with the default, and then we can also look at the layout. And with the layout, we can make some customizations. A couple things that you can consider is this display mode. We can either fit to width or have it be the actual size. It's a little small if you can't see it, but I'm going to click fit to width here. And this is basically going to say whatever device a person's using, it's going to fit to their screen. So they're not going to scroll left to right. They might have to maybe scroll up to down. Also, I'm going to remove the margin, just personal design preference. I tend to like to remove the margin. You can also change the canvas size here. So since we're looking at a screen, let's make it a screen size. You can also customize the dimensions of your canvas. So if you want to make it longer, you can do that. I think the max is 10,000 pixels to scroll, and then it kind of cuts you out. At least that's what I've found, unless they've continued to add that. And you can kind of add some more grid settings, other components here. So I think the canvas looks good. Don't need to make any more changes there. So now we're going to actually go back to our data set and add some variables. So again, if we go to resource, manage added data sources, we're going to go back into our roster data. We're going to edit it. And again, we see our different variables here, our different column headings. And we're actually going to create another variable. So in order to do that, you click add a field in the upper right corner. And I want to create a new variable because the SPED status, I don't really like the 0-1 dichotomy. I want to actually explicitly say what that means. So I'm going to call this SPED classification. And from there, I can do a formula. Now, a quick note is the formula is not what you're used to with Google Sheets or Excel. It's more akin to SQL coding language. So just as a heads up, that is a difference if you're used to Google Sheets. But we are going to do a simple if-else statement with the proper coding syntax. We're going to do case, and then whenever our SPED status, so we can just start typing SPED status and it should show up. If SPED status equals 1, then we're going to call it special education. Check that I spelled it right. If it doesn't, we're going to do else, and we're going to call it general education. And then we are going to end the command. So essentially what this does is whenever we have a row or a case that has SPED status equal to 1, we're going to call it special education. If it's not a 1 in our data, that's only 0 because we only have 0s and 1s. We're going to call it general education, and then we're going to end that command. Now, one thing that we do need to check every time we have a different formula is we want to check for this green check in the bottom left corner. That is telling us that the formula syntax is valid. So if you don't see this green check, you might need to take a look at your formula and debug a little bit. Ours looks good, so we're going to save this variable, and we're going to press done. And so if we actually go back into if we go back to our manage added data sources, oh, this isn't good. Let's try that again. We are going to remove it, add it again. Roster data, here we are. Should take a moment. Pardon that. We are going to edit it, add our field. I'm going to cheat, and I already have this written. Make sure all the syntax is good. We see we don't have the green check mark. And we're going to call this SPED classification. And we are going to save. Now, if we go back to all of our fields, there we go. Now we have SPED classification. We have a little function icon there. And that just means that it's a formula. Now, there's one other thing that we're going to do with our data before we move on. And it's going to be a little weird now, but we'll describe, I'll go over it in a little bit, is we actually, grade level is typically a dimension, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We actually are going to want to duplicate it for now. So we're going to click the 3 dots there, duplicate it, and actually rename it grade level, and we're just going to add it as a metric. We have to do this because we're going to have one chart that actually needs to sort by a metric of the grade level, but then we're going to use grade level as a dimension. Again, don't expect you to internalize that at the moment, but we are going to do this with our data. So now our data is all good. Now we can press done. And there we go, we have our data. And if we close out, can delete that, we have our data ready to go. We still don't have any charts, but there is another thing that we are going to do. Something with Google Data Studio, it's similar to Power BI and other things, is that we can actually blend data. And what blending data is it's merging 2 or more data sets by matching 1 or more characteristics. So if we look back at our data, we see that we have student ID here, and we have, if we scroll up, student ID here. So we're actually going to match based on student ID. So to do that, we're going to go to Resource and Manage Blended Data, and we're going to add a data view. To do this, we're going to add both of our data pieces. So we're going to add our roster data, we're going to add another data source, and we're going to find our assessment data and add that as well. Now there's a few things that we see here. We see join keys, dimensions, metrics, state ranges, and filters. The first thing that we want to pay attention to is the join key. And so that's what we're going to match on. So we want to match on student ID. So we can find student ID, drag it here, and we see that it actually automatically did it for the other data set as well. Just double check and make sure that those are the proper variables. Now is where we go into this dimensions versus metrics. They're both variables, but a rule of thumb is that dimensions are descriptive variables. Those are typically your categorical variables, and metrics are measurable or numerical variables. So those are the data points that you might apply aggregations to. So if we look at our roster data, gender, that's a descriptive variable, so we're going to make that a dimension. Race, ethnicity is as well. Our special education classification is, and also our grade level is. We also have metrics, and those are ones that, like I said, that you might apply some sort of formula. It's going to code it more as a numerical, manipulable data point. And so that is actually, like, we can do SPED status if we want, if we might want to take the average of those zeros and ones. And then we're also going to want to have this grade level metric. And the reason that we have this grade level metric is for sorting purposes. You need to sort by a metric variable. We'll get into that once we're making charts. For our assessment data, we can just categorize our different variables. So our date, we can drag to date range. Our subject, math and reading, is again descriptive. So we're going to move that to our dimensions. And then our score, we're going to add as a metric because we're going to do some aggregation. If you click on the little sum icon, you can actually change the default aggregation. Sometimes it is a default aggregation, sometimes it's not, but you're welcome to adjust these as needed. So maybe I want to take the average of SPED status and this grade level metric. You can kind of pick one. I'll do minimum and more on that in a little bit. For kicks, I'll add the record count here. And so if we actually go to the right-hand side of our screen, we can actually name our blended data source. Let's call it roster plus assessment. And we can see all of our variables. So we can double check and make sure all of the variables that we want to see are included. I'm looking, everything looks pretty good. And I think we can move on. So we're going to save this and we're going to close out. And if we actually go back to our manage our blended data, we see that it's saved here. So we've done a lot of stuff and we haven't even made any charts yet. So let's start making it fun. Now we can do the fun part. So we're gonna start by adding a title to our chart. And to do that, you can either go to Insert and create a text box, or you can just click the text box here. Let's call this SPED Reading Dashboard, because we are interested in the reading scores of our special education population. On the right-hand side, you can actually see different text properties. So if you want to change the justification, if you want to link it, if you want to change the size, let's make the font a little bigger so it's nice and readable. We can do that as well. Can change colors and do all the formatting there. Now let's make a chart. So I know that I want to make a column chart showing the median reading score by both grade level and special education classification. So I'm going to either insert and choose my chart, or I'm going to click this add a chart button. And we're going to find a bar chart. I just want a simple column chart. We can really click it wherever we want at right now because we don't necessarily care about formatting. Let's make it a little bigger just so everyone can see. And so we'll see here that Google just created a generic chart. And if we actually look at it, we can see the data source here. This isn't the data source that we want to use. So we're actually going to go click on that. And these are our data sources that we can use. We see this little blendy icon. We want to use our blended data here. From here, we want to show the scores by grade level. So grade level, again, is going to be our dimension. We care about the category. So like how female and male is kind of a descriptive categorical variable. While it's a number, our grade level is going to serve that same purpose. So we're going to drag grade level to our dimension. And now what we see is the record count. So the counts of students in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. Cool table, but not what we want to know. We want to see the median score by grade level. So we're going to go down, we see dimension, and we're going to go to metric. We see that it's our record count. We actually want that to be our score. So we're going to drag score here. And we don't want to sum the number of scores in each grade. That's not very useful. So we want to change that. So if we click the edit thing, it says sum. We click the little pencil, and we're actually going to change it to median. And now we'll see that the numbers have changed. We see that the median 9th grade score is close to a 60, and it actually goes down there. Not necessarily what you want to see in student data, but it is made up data, so we're going to roll with it. The next thing that we want to do is break it up by special education classification. And to do that, we're going to find our SPED classification variable, and we're going to drag it to this thing that says break down dimensions. So how do you want to break down the chart by? We want to break it down by special education status. So now that we see the chart has changed, we have a blue bar that shows the special education median score, and the teal bars show the general education median score. We did this. My grade levels are in order, which is cool, but it is a fluke. You might have it be 9, 10, 12, 11, and that's not good. Usually when we have grade level, we want to sort by that grade level order, no matter what. So we're going to go down, we go from data source all the way down to sort. And right now it's sorting by the median score. So actually, if we took out our SPED breakdown, we see that 9th graders have the highest score, and it goes down that way. And so that's actually how the sort is working now. So let's break it down again by special education and general education. And so we need to change this sort thing, because we don't want our sort or our order of our grade levels to be dependent on the scores that they receive. So we're going to click, instead of score, we're going to click on that, and we're going to go down and find our metric. And so this is why we needed 2 grade level variables, because the sort, you always have to sort by a number. And so we already told Google Data Studio that grade level is a dimension, and it just is really confusing for Data Studio. So that's why we had to create a second variable. And that's only if you have 2 different variables that might take 2 different forms in one chart. It's pretty rare, but hopefully this will ease some frustration if you encounter it in the future. So again, we're going to sort by grade level. We don't want to sum the grade level. We want to, that would take 9 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9 for the 9th graders. We would either want to take the average, which the average of bunch of 9s is going to be 9. You could also take the minimum or maximum, so one of those fields. I'll just take the min. And we see here that, it's going in the wrong order. We see 12th grade, then 11th grade, then 10th grade, then 9th grade. We're actually going to want to change that to ascending order. So now if we do that, we see that, great, it is in ascending order, and this will not depend on what score students get. No matter what, if we get more data added, this order will stay the same. Next, this is showing all of our assessment data. So one thing that we might want to do is we might want to apply a filter. So if we go down, you can add a bar chart filter. So let's create one, and we only want to include reading data. So it's going to say reading only. It can be any name you want, but we're going to include all of the rows only where the subject contains reading. And so, if it equals reading, it also contains it. So that's sufficient. From here, we can double check, it looks good, and then we can save. And we might notice that our values changed a little bit because now that we're only including reading scores. One other thing, we're going to actually decheck this thing that says enable sorting. So we'll disable sorting. And that's only just because you can have people customize their sorting. We don't want them to do that. We'll just keep this default as it is. And so it just cleans it up a little bit.
And then how did you add a filter here?
Great question. So you might have to click out of the chart and click back in. But if you scroll down, so you have dimensions, metrics, sort, secondary sort, we're going to go to this filter. And so Sometimes you do have to click out of the chart and click back in if it's not showing up. And from there, you can add a filter. We'll edit ours. We gave it the name reading only. We decided to include only the rows where the subject contains reading, and we can save. And actually, if you go up to resource and manage filters, we'll actually see this filter pop up here. So this is another way that if you don't want to add the filter in your chart, you can actually add filters here, and then it kind of saves the filter. So if you have another chart, you can also use that same filter. Great, so now we have the chart. Now we might want to add some maybe design elements. The whole time we've been in this data section here in the right-hand side, and we can now click on style. And there's different features here. We are going to actually show our data labels just for kicks. And if we go down, let's show our x-axis title just to be very explicit. And we can customize the y-axis. Maybe we want it to start at 0. We know the max is 100. And we want it to go by units of 25. And so then you can make those changes there. We can also add a text box and add a title of our chart. I already have it made, so I'm just gonna plop it here. And we can drag our charts and align them as we like as well. So we have one chart here. It's good to go. We're now gonna add one more chart. We're gonna add a donut chart. So we're gonna go back to add a chart. We're gonna find our little trusty donut chart. Let's stick it here. And we see that we've kind of, Google's created a default chart that it thinks we'll like. It's actually not too far off. We want to see the breakdown of special education and general education students. So we just are going to need to double check and course correct as needed. So we see that our data source is correct. Our dimension is special education classification. That's great. But the metric that it's using is actually score. And since we're not interested in the breakdown of scores, we're interested in the breakdown of students, we can actually drag our trusty student ID variable here. And instead of summing all of the student IDs, we're going to actually change that. And we want to count the distinct amount of student IDs. So this is going to count all of the unique student IDs within our data, and then it's going to count those up and then convert them to a percentage here. So we see that about 24.6% of our students in our fake data set are special education students. Next, we have two charts. That's great, but let's add some page filters to make it a little more interactive. And to do that, we're going to go up top here. We're going to click this upside down triangle, and this is filter control. We're going to actually make 4 filters here. We're going to do grade level, race, ethnicity, gender, and we're also going to do one for the assessment date range. To do the filter, we click the upside down triangle. We can drag it wherever we want. Say we want it here. And it kind of picks a default dimension that we're going to be filtering by. We want to first do it by grade level, so we can actually drag grade level to our dimension, and we're good to go there. And you can either copy and paste or continue to, add a filter. And maybe we want to do one for race, ethnicity. We can drag that there. And maybe we want to add another one for gender, and we can drag that here. One thing to note is there's kind of some guides within Google Data Studio to align stuff. You can also select multiple ones by holding down the control, or I think command key on Macs, and you can right click and you can align horizontally or vertically. So we can just make sure everything is aligned, and you saw that things moved around just a little bit there. So just a rule of thumb is you add some design elements. Now, if you want to add a date filter, you're going to actually have to go to this calendar icon, and it says date range. And we're going to go ahead and add it here. Now, something cool about the date range is you can set a custom default date range. So right now it's just auto. But we can actually set, since I know the assessment took place from March 2nd to March 13th, I can actually set this automatically as the kind of anchor default date range. From there, you're welcome. We can add some design elements. Maybe we want to add a box here, and maybe we want to add a label that says filters. I'm gonna save time and just copy and paste what I made before. One thing that you might notice is that it's sometimes tricky to make sure you're clicking on the right one. You can also use the arrows if that's easier. And also for the labels, so any boxes and titles you might want to order and you might want to send it to back. And that's just for people who are in view mode. They might be like clicking on stuff and they're like, why isn't this working? And that's because they're actually clicking on the box, not necessarily the filter. So let's actually select these. We'll actually align them. We're going to align them horizontally. Let's align them left. So now they're all nice. And we can, we can add our box here. Looks beautiful. Move this back up. And actually, let's give a title to this chart as well. So we see our SPED breakdown, and awesome. Now there's one more thing that we are going to add, and that is, say we want to show just a number showing the school-wide median reading score. To do that, we are going to add another chart, and this time we're going to add a scorecard. So that's just a number, and let's just add it here. What the scorecard is it's just going to show like a single number. So we want to show the median score for the whole school, particularly the reading score. So the score is great. We don't care about the sum of the score. So we're going to go to median. We see that this has adjusted, and we also want to add a filter here. We just care about the reading score. So we're going to click down here, filter, add a filter, and we can either create a filter at the bottom, it's a little hard to see, or we can use the same filter that we already made. And we see that the score has adjusted a little bit. Now this score word is not very helpful. So we're actually going to go to the style part of this chart, and we'll center the metric, and we're actually going to hide the metric name. So we just see the number here. And we're going to actually add our own title. So let's add our own title. We can move our box how we like it, and we can add another decorative box here. And again, we'll move this decorative box. We'll send that to the back. Great. Now, one thing that you might notice, if we click this trusty view button, we can actually preview what people are going to see. And oh, it looks like some of our things are hidden. So we're going to go back and edit. And oh, yep, our text box is actually in the front. So we're going to send that to the back, view it again. And yep, we can interact here. So if we look at only 10th graders, we see that all of these fields are going to change, including the school-wide median reading score. We don't want that. We want that to stay the same no matter what. And so what we're going to actually do is group the charts based on what we want them to interact with. And it's surprisingly simple, but you just have to get your mind around it. We're going to choose the charts that interact with each other so that we want them to communicate to each other. And then we will group those. So then anything that's left out of that group is not going to be interacting with those other tools. So we're going to select all of our filters and the two charts that we want to interact with those filters. It's the SPED breakdown and the median reading scores by grade level. We do not want to select this median school-wide reading score. and then we're going to right click and group it. So now if we view and we look at our 10th graders, everything else changed, but this 54 stayed. So that's helpful if you want to, have one or two variables that maybe you don't want to interact, or you only want them to interact with specific filters. And so this is pretty much our chart. Now we can do some formatting, some of these, filters might not be as aligned as we want. So you can also always go back and format, everything, make sure everything aligns well. And then one other thing that I want to share really quick before we move on is that you can also add multiple pages. So at the top left, you can click add a page, and we've created a new blank page, and maybe we want to link to the home page. So we can do home page, maybe make it a little bigger, and we can actually link it to different pages within the document. So we can actually link it to page 1, apply it. And so if we actually view this page, if someone clicks home page, it will bring them back to page 1. So this is really nice if we're going to update the, it's really good if you want people to be able to navigate very nicely between the two. I'm going to pause here, and if there's any questions that we can answer.
We have a question that just came in. If it came in a long time ago, I'm sorry. The comments are a little laggy. I think this is when you are linking the 3 data sets there.
Okay.
So it says, will these only update if data is added to the linked data set, or does it work if you replace the data, like keeping the same headers, columns, concept, but copy and paste the whole thing of an updated data set?
Yeah, so my understanding is that, like, if we were in this data set here and we wanted to keep these heading titles but completely change out the data, we can do that. And then back in here, if we click this refresh icon here, everything should update. And so even with the linked data, that all should be kosher, because you're still linking to that same data set.
Awesome. We had another question about the difference between dimensions and metrics, but I think that leads into your next slide, maybe.
Yes. This is kind of our dashboard. There are some lessons that I learned that I'll share with you all, and that is one of them. I know this metric dimension thing is a little confusing, and sometimes you may even have to try some trial and error. But these are some tips and tricks that I have encountered when I've been in Google Data Studio. So these are things that you can keep in mind as you create bigger and better dashboards. These are some things that I've learned. So first, Google favors tidy data. So tidy data sets, they're data sets that are typically pretty easy to manipulate, model, and visualize, especially in Google Data Studio. They have a specific structure. So each variable is a column, and each observation is a row, and then each observational unit is a table. So for instance, if we go back to our data set and we look at assessments, you'll see here that I didn't do student ID, math score, reading score, math date, reading date. We actually have one variable for our IDs, one variable for all of our scores, one variable for our dates, and one variable for our subject. It's not necessarily impossible to do it other ways, but it's much easier, and this is kind of the default data structure that Google Data Studio operates in. Secondly, it is helpful to finalize your data set prior to your data viz. So before you make your dashboard, make sure your column names are finalized per that question that was asked. Google can seamlessly incorporate new rows and even replace rows, but adding columns is a bit tedious. Typically, you're going to have to unlink your data and relink it back in. So it's just going to add some steps. So to the extent that you can, finalize your data set prior to the data viz, particularly those column headings. Next, it's helpful if you can choose your chart ahead of time. So if you have a bar chart and you want to switch to a line chart, for instance, you're going to have to create a new chart. It's more difficult to toggle between. I know like Excel and some other tools, you can like, I want to test a bar chart and then I want to see what it would look as a line chart. With Google, you can't do it that seamlessly. You can, I think, toggle between like regular bars and stacked bars, but that's just something to keep in mind that it's not as user-friendly there. Next is this dimensions metric distinction. My rule of thumb when I think of dimensions is like dimensions are descriptive and metrics can be measured. That's kind of my rule of thumb as I go through. I think grade level is sometimes a little funky if you wanted to sort by that. Google doesn't, in one chart, it doesn't like, it's not very happy when you have the same variable be a dimension and a metric, and that's why we had to make that copy. But yeah, so I kind of think like D's and M's, dimensions are descriptive and metrics can be measured. Another way to go about it is think like, what are the things that I'm going to be applying different aggregations or that I might analyze? And so those are going to be your metrics, and typically everything else is going to be a dimension. So yeah, also another thing that I've encountered is that if you give someone edit access to the data, so the Google Sheet, that doesn't necessarily mean they can always edit the data in Google Data Studio. In the home page of Data Studio, there's actually a section that says like, it has like reports and it has data sources. And so that's where you would then grant edit access if you wanted people to edit your data source there. So that might just be something that you might encounter occasionally if you wanted to add additional collaborators to your dashboard. And lastly, you can create multiple pages, and it's really helpful to do that. And you can easily create hyperlinks to navigate between them. Users can navigate without hyperlinks. If we go here and we're going in view mode, we can, toggle between two pages, but hyperlinks are easy and you can actually even rename your pages. If we click page 1, we can click on these 3 dots and rename, and that we can actually customize it. So if we wanted to title this home. So that's a really nice way, especially if you have like a lot of information you want to pack into a dashboard. It's sometimes nice to organize it that way. And the last thing that I will mention is just to have fun and to continue learning. You might encounter some quirks here and there throughout your process of learning Data Studio. I have, and first trial and error is helpful. And then also Google, obviously you can Google a lot of this stuff and they're going to have really good resources there. So I know that was a ton of information. Again, this was recorded, so you can go back, but that is our session. We really wanted to thank you for tuning in. Before we go to questions, I wanted to give a quick plug to complete the workshop evaluation. It is in the Whova app, but also you can use this link here.
It's also in the chat as well.
Oh, also in the chat. And so again, we want to see how we can make sessions like this better in the future. And so please, we value your feedback. Great. Now for the remaining 10 or so minutes, we have some time for questions.
Yeah, we have a couple questions. First off, I want to thank everyone. We have an awesome group. We have people answering some of the questions before they even popped up in my feed. So, great engaging group. You guys get an A+. And if we went too fast, no worries. This is recorded, so feel free to go back and dig deep in the data sets. First question is there functionality to link to view the source data? For example, if you wanted to know which students fell into a certain category?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So you can link to the source data. You can also, what I have also done is let's see if I can do it quick. You can also like create a table. So if you wanted to insert a table, I've done it. So I've added different fields. So maybe we would have like student ID, and you can add different, and maybe race, ethnicity, and so you can actually see maybe what their score is as well. So this is what I've done, and then I've actually done a filter where you can like search for their name. So that is another way if you want it like within this document. You can also, I believe, you might be able to have, I need to look at it, but you can, I know, like add links to it, and you should be able to link to your source data as well. I don't know if it will be embedded, but you can definitely create a link there.
Good, great. Again, keep typing your questions in. We have one more queued up here. We have one that says, can you zoom out and talk for a minute about the rationale for using a tool like Data Studio over using Sheets for analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of it is personal preference. I found that I think one of the, pluses of Google Data Studio over Google Sheets is the interactivity. It's going to be, like a nice clean interface where folks can go in and use the different filters. I think also another thing would be like blending in different data sources. Maybe Google Sheets can do that. You guys might be more sophisticated than I am, but that blending is also really helpful. So you don't have to like work on this master data set and do indexing and matching and VLOOKUPs just to get the data set nice. This is a really easy way that you can have two data sets and merge them seamlessly. But again, part of it is personal preference. I would see also what your team is used to using. I've found in my experience that when we have a link to a dashboard like this, it's very clean and you don't have to worry about people editing your raw data. It's pretty user-friendly. And yeah, it's again, though, personal preference. If you think with your organization, Google Sheets is like the way to go. We can see the data, we can see the charts there. You know, that is also, if it makes sense for your organization, that's also a great option.
Great. We have one more queued up here. How secure is the data?
That is a great question. So that is actually probably one of the downsides of Google Data Studio over some of the other platforms. So Google Data Studio is really easy to share. So if you click share, there are, you can either you know, specify specific people, or we can give like everyone access who has the link. So that is something to keep in mind. I know typically, you know, you should just take that into mind, and I would look at your organization policies as well and what they encourage in terms of data security. I know people have different levels of security with different Google accounts. I think that is a great question and something to look into. I think the benefit of Google Data Studio is when you're already doing things with Google. So if your organization is already tracking student data in Google Sheets, this might be a great way to seamlessly integrate the two. Or I've sent out surveys in Google Forms, and so that might be, you know, maybe less sensitive data, and I might feel comfortable linking that with a dashboard. But that again is, I would check with your organization as to what they recommend.
Awesome. We'll keep the questions coming in. We don't have any right now. This is an awesome, engaging group. So you guys are doing a great job. This is awesome. Here we go. We got another. Yeah, keep them coming. It looks like we have another question. And apologies if you asked this question like 20 minutes ago. Have you found that the performance degrades at a certain point if you have, say, 1,000 students, 4 to 5 data sources, 1 page per grade level, anything like that?
That's a good question. So I've done it for like school data where we've had like many different columns, and I don't know if we've had like 10,000 rows of data. I would say that generally it works pretty well. The one thing that it might lag is it might take a little more time to like set up. It wouldn't be like minutes or hours, but it would take, it might take a couple extra seconds to kind of warm up. And again, even when you change your filters, it might take a second to think and go through all of the data. I haven't encountered that personally. It's definitely possible. My hunch would be that there might be some lag, but it wouldn't be like a significant lag. But that is also a great question.
Okay. Great. It looks like from my end, it looks like those are all the questions. So thank you so much, everyone. We can get the screen back up. If you guys have any further questions or go back in the recording and have additional questions, feel free to reach out to either Kendra or I. We have our emails right there. Again, don't forget to fill out the survey. We value feedback and we want to keep improving. So definitely get those survey results in. We can even create a Google Data Studio dashboard of all the results. So there we go. And yeah, unless there are any other questions, we hope you guys have a nice, cool weekend and enjoy Netflix or Disney Plus this weekend. It looks like those are your favorite ones. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll leave this up for a little bit so you can get the SurveyMonkey link here. But thanks, everyone, and great job. I love the interactivity. You guys are awesome and engaging. So
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. And again, don't hesitate to reach out either in the app or via email after the fact if you want to connect.